What's good, beautiful people? It's your boo, it's your bae, the entrepreneurial hoe, and your future ex-wife, Dani Nopanties. And welcome to another episode of Hoe Adjacent, your go-to spot for unfiltered chats about sex, dating, relationships, and leveling up as your boldest and most liberated sexual selves. But first, let's get this out the way. I'm not a therapist or a counselor. I'm just fascinated by all things sex and interested in sharing what I've learned over the years while working in the adult industry. And I want to bring that to all my hoe adjacent friends. Consider this your guilty pleasure with a purpose, equal parts entertainment and enlightenment. So, why the name hoe adjacent? Let's be real, whether you've had a full-blown hoe phase, have dabbled in hoish tendencies, or just know a hoe, and we all do. You're in the club, and there's no judgment here. Just consider this your sex-positive playground. Now, before we dive in, let's set the tone. This is a safe space, one that centers Black folks, queer and trans voices, non-binary babes, disabled communities, and anyone existing at the margins. While I'll chat with guests from all walks of life, don't forget that Black liberation is the heartbeat of this show. And yes, that includes Black sexual liberation. So get cozy, let's laugh, learn, and grow together. Today, I'm excited to welcome an incredible guest to the show, my friend, whom I love dearly, Dr. Lisa Speidel. Lisa is an associate professor in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Department at the University of Virginia. She's also a certified sexuality educator through the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, for ASECT. With over 30 years of experience as an educator, Lisa has dedicated her career to exploring topics like masculinity, joyful and respectful sexuality, gender-based violence, and the intersections of race and other forms of oppression. She's also the co-author of the groundbreaking book, The Edge of Sex, Navigating a Sexually Confusing Culture from the Margins, which was published in 2020. And if that wasn't enough, Lisa has been teaching women's self-defense for 3 decades, both in the Charlottesville community and as a credit-based course at UVA. But wait, there's more. Lisa has a new book out now, Bisexuality Beyond Binaries, celebrating multiple bisexual identities in a world of erasure, which is available online now. We'll be diving into her work, her insights on sexuality and societal views, and what it means to navigate in a world that often marginalizes and misunderstands the complexities of human identity. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Lisa Speidel to the show.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much, Lisa. I know you are a busy woman. Thank you for making time to chat with us today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let's jump into these questions, shall we?
Sure.
What inspired you to write Bisexual Beyond Binaries?
Bisexuality beyond
I'm
binaries.
sorry. Let's ask the question again. What inspired you to write Bisexuality Beyond Binaries?
Good question. I was talking to my publisher at the time who was looking for a book on bisexuality. So that was one thing. The second thing was a lot of my students were writing about being bisexual. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of folks that are writing about this and what's going on with that. And also exploring my own bisexuality were all factors in creating this book. So it's very personal. And then, also part of my teaching. So I thought it was a good time to go ahead and work on it.
Did anything in particular stand out to you while you were conducting your interviews for this book?
Really, it was a huge learning process. I just learned so much. That was what was so amazing and really got connected to so many different people nationally and Sherry Eisner too. So internationally, and you connected me to Wolf Hudson. There's just this like huge network of people that I kept getting connected to and just learning like how many people were doing work around bisexuality and what kind of conversations were actually happening. I didn't realize to what extent that was going on. And it really was so informational and just really inspirational too. One of my favorite people I met was A. Billy Jones Hennon. And he was one of the first bisexual activists in the 60s. And also a Black man. He recently died last year. So
Mhm.
unfortunately died before the book came out, but it was so great to learn the history. And Lorraine Hutchins also is one of the original activists, and getting to interview her. There are just so many people that I got connected to that kept me motivated to keep going. It's like, I got to finish this because there's all of these voices involved that I really wanted to support.
So, in talking to all these different people, what are some of the recurring themes that you found?
There is a lot of misunderstanding about bisexuality. There's a lot of bi erasure. There's a lot of folks who are being told that it's not a real sexual orientation, that they need to make a choice, that there are all these stereotypes. And to really, although I knew about some of those stereotypes and definitely write about that as part of the erasure, the world of erasure piece, to really learn about what the impact of that actually is and the long term impact and the harm that's being caused was really powerful. And to know that this has been going on for generations and really all the work that people are trying to do to challenge that and to really see that we're causing a lot of harm to a large percentage of people. Bisexual people make up over 52, it's estimated around 52, 53% of the LGBT community. And so we are called the invisible majority because it's often deemed not a real sexual orientation.
Mhm. So, is that what you're hoping readers will take away from it? Is that we're increasing the representation of bisexual folks and challenging the stereotypes and stigma?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. It's also even within sexual community, what voices aren't heard. So, older folks, trans folks, people with disabilities, people of color, there's always that issue of sort of the dominant narrative of white, cis, younger, attractive. If you're thinking of like media representation and what do we actually see, which is a whole nother chapter in the book about media representation and what's problematic with that. But really thinking about the unheard voices of the unheard voices.
Yes. And I did do an interview for this book.
Including pansexual people
Yes.
too.
I was gonna say that I identify as pansexual, but I understand that like everything's a spectrum and different names for a lot of the same shit. But
But it's just that idea. The term is monosexism, this idea that being attracted to only one gender is the norm. And that if you're attracted to more than one gender, then something's wrong with you.
yeah.
So, how do we define? I had never heard of the term monosexism before doing this research and thinking about how that intersects with biphobia and racism and transphobia and ageism. That's the intersectional approach, of course, is looking at the multiple layers of different forms of oppression and how is that actually impacting by less people.
One thing that I really love about you, and even when I was a student of yours, the way that you ask questions is so thoughtful and very intentional. And I feel like you are one of the best question askers I've ever met in my life. I just wanted to say that.
How? That's so nice of you. I don't know if that's ever been a compliment I've gotten before, but I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's
And
a
your
counseling
question.
background.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I see it. What is there a term for it? Is it the Socratic method or is it something else?
No idea.
Okay, sorry, disregard. I'll edit that out probably.
It's
It's
called
the Lisa Speidel method.
yes, active listening and
Yeah,
open-ended questioning is part of active listening.
that's it. Honestly, the way that you ask those open-ended questions, it's just so cool to me. And I find that and maybe in some ways, have adopted that in my like sex work as a dom, like asking clarifying questions and ways that I can try to gather more information, even beyond what maybe my sub realizes that they are interested in. So I just wanted to share that with you. I feel like now I'm a better question asker because of you.
Well, that's good. However, people can take it out into the work that they're doing.
Absolutely. And I bet that even some of your other students may also share that sentiment.
Yeah.
But were there any surprising discoveries while researching and interviewing for this?
I think the rate in which bisexual people experience mental health disparities, suicide rates, eating disorders, a lot of the struggle. I think that even I was influenced by this as thinking of like bisexuality as this sort of, I it was hard for me to even claim it for myself. Like I was so influenced by this idea of it being this sort of frivolous, not serious, fun identity, and to really B's been in the LGBT all along, but like that's sort of all the stereotypes and the societal norms around belittling it as a real sexual orientation. Like I already said, I was definitely impacted by that. I felt like I wasn't able to claim it as an identity almost. Oh, it's not real, even though I totally am bisexual and fit that definition for myself. It's really up to each person how they identify. And to really learn about the actual struggle is, but also to learn about all of the joy. And so that's part of that title of the second half of the title of the book is celebrating multiple bisexualities and the multiple bisexual identities in a world of erasure. How do we address both pieces, the struggle, but the joy too? If we don't look at the joy and the pleasure and the fun, how are we taking away from people's humanity, including both pieces? There's a whole chapter that's just on the joy of bisexuality because of that, how that's so important, the form of resistance,
Hmm.
even more so now in our present political landscape. It just really recognizing, again, like all these people that I met and that this is a real sexual orientation. It's a real issue and there's a lot of work to be done.
With this book, I understand that with your previous book, The Edge of Sex, you are identifying kind of some gaps in the literature that was available for your work at the university. So for this book, who is your ideal audience?
Of course, I want everybody to read the book
Mhm.
regardless. So I think ideally it would be for sex educators and for counselors, just have a better understanding, have spoken with people who are in therapy, and it's supposed to be queer friendly therapists who don't understand bisexuality and haven't treated it as a real sexuality. Like, how do you know if you haven't slept with a woman? Or how do you know if you haven't slept with a man? Language and, oh, this is clearly just a phase. And they were getting that from therapists, right? Having therapists and counselors access that information. So for bisexual folks themselves to know they're not alone and to see all these different perspectives. And to also the research that I did since I wrote 12 chapters plus have personal narratives and interviews and also everyday people. So it's pretty much everybody.
Have you had any like responses from the folks you've interviewed or people who you told about the book?
Yeah, I had posted about that it was coming out and got folks that had actually read parts of it and or were interviewed were like, this book is phenomenal. So that was very kind of them. They're going to be a really good resource. It'll be interesting to see everybody outside of who was involved in the project.
We'll include the link in the description for folks to click.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Happy to support. So, with that, how did you get into sex education? Where did that start?
Not intentional, but background is in sexual assault work. So I was doing sexual assault prevention, education, and trainings. And we started to incorporate joyful, respectful sexuality and sex as prevention to decrease sexual violence. That there were lots of risk factors in the way that we were learning about sex or not learning about sex or having to go figure it out on our own. So it was the background that started the conversation. I had a really great sex education course in 8th grade that
Mm.
probably really triggered all of this through the Unitarian Church curriculum at the time that was called About Your Sexuality, which is now called OWL, Our Whole Lives. And it's actually the curriculum that I based my human sexualities class on. That was pretty life changing. I definitely give them credit as why I'm as open as I am to talk about sex, why I think it's important to be talking about it, why I see it as a social justice issue. And so there's that background. It was actually started by the United Church of Christ and the Unitarians. Interesting.
That's
Uh,
incredibly interesting.
yeah. And both very progressive denominations. And so this curriculum still exists, however many
Thank God.
decades. Yeah. The challenge is, of course, accessing it and getting people to be open to it being taught because it's very inclusive, holistic. I loved Sunday school that year. In 8th grade, I was like, "Yep, ready to go." But then going to grad school and teaching multicultural education, in which we incorporated gender and sexual orientation as part of that class, and then becoming a faculty member with WGS. There's a quick story behind how I started teaching human sexualities, which was a student in my class. We were talking about, oh, it's under 20% of people with vaginas can orgasm with just penile penetration. And this guy in class raised his hand and that like, yes. I wasn't even it was called like gender and multiculturalism was the class. I don't know why I was talking about this. It's all connected in my head. And he raises his hand and is my girlfriend can. And I'm like, oh, great, good for you. So supportive. And then you keep talking, and then he raises his hand again and is, but why? Why is it such a small percentage? And you're drawing a vulva and showing where the clitoris is versus a vagina. And that was my aha moment. I don't think this person has any idea how pivotal his question was. I was like, oh my gosh, the more I was teaching in WGS, here are these people in their 20s that don't have information. We didn't get good sex education before college and then expected that you're just supposed to know all this stuff and people are sexually active and don't know a lot of information. And I mean, I know people my age that don't know a lot of information have had babies and families, and the cycle hasn't quite been broken, even with the access we have to the internet and information. There's still a
Yeah.
lot of unlearning and learning that's happening at any age. But I put in a proposal to teach human sexualities. It took a little while for that to be approved. I think that there was concern that we can talk about identity politics, but to actually talk about sex and pleasure and for it to be more of a sex ed course makes people nervous. But it has grown to 60 people a semester with huge wait lists. And when I first started teaching it 8 years ago, I was like, oh my God, all these 20-year-olds, they're going to know everything. What the hell do I actually know? And one of the most common comments is I thought I knew everything and I know nothing. And I was like, okay, like I know what I'm doing. In the process, also got certified as a sexuality educator just to expand my knowledge base. And so just, yeah, just kept growing from there. And the UVA's never really had a human sexualities class. There were versions of courses on love and sex, but have it specifically a human sexualities class. This was a new exploration of a course.
Yeah. And now we're seeing more human sexualities like programs popping up too, or like classes popping up at other
Yes.
universities and colleges. So that's cool. Exciting.
Yeah. There's other schools like VCU's had a human sexualities course for decades. So it's not like it was a totally foreign concept to other places, but it makes people nervous that people are actually talking about sex. We get to see it everywhere. You can see it on TV shows, porn, website accessing, sex workers everywhere, wherever we
Mhm.
are. We can't talk about it.
Yeah. We want to keep you in the dark. Yeah. I find that, I think, to touch on your point that you made earlier about this misinformation that's continuing, and even with the internet, I think it's actually quickly spreading misinformation, which is
Right.
dangerous. There's a lot of work to be done in that regard. Because you're working with so many young folks and older folks, because you're working, I saw that you're doing, what was it, a talk of some sort at unpacking some of this misinformation around like sex education?
Yeah, there's this program that's called Profs and Pints, and that this guy, Peter Schmidt, started out of DC, and it happens in 10 different cities. And once a month, it's a different professor does a talk. So he created it so community members could have access to professors and their research and their work. So yeah, just did that last week. It was on our sexual miseducation was the title of that one.
So when you are both in the classroom and out of the classroom, how are you approaching like safe spaces and creating a more inclusive environments to have these discussions?
It's hard, but really trying to emphasize that we're all different people. We have all different backgrounds. We have different experiences with systemic oppression. We have different religions, different cultures, different gender identities, sexual orientations. There's just so much going on in the classroom in particular, and trying to create a space that's respectful. I'm not shy about what I'm teaching is going to be considered more on the progressive liberal side, but I really believe this is a bipartisan conversation, that everybody is navigating sexuality. And so, how do we create a space to have those conversations? If you are religious and feel very strongly that you want to wait until marriage to be sexual, how do I respect? How do we all respect that decision? That what feels right for you needs to be up to you. But if you want to go this weekend and go hook up with three different people, how do we respect that also? Right? So just approaching it that way. I try to do things like give people hand out cards so people can anonymously ask questions and I answer a few of those at the beginning of each class. People really, it's like, oh, do you have the white cards today? Like, are you going to answer those questions? And that's been really fun, just to get folks that are from all over taking this class. Trying to create a space, a community of respect, a community also, just to approach teaching as how do we create community so people are getting to know each other, learning from each other, not just from me. I'm not treating them as a bunch of novices who know nothing and I'm the expert. It's we're all learners, we're all teachers. How do we work as a collective to really my main goal is to try to decrease harm.
And I wish that we could get everyone in the world in front of one of your classes because there's a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
Because so you're seeing from so many different people, like the overall like idea and where they are with their attitudes around like sex and their education. So how do you think overall society's attitude about sex and sexuality is evolving or devolving? And what changes would you like to see?
I think people keep thinking like, oh, the next generation's more progressive or more open or more informed. And everybody's just all over the place. I just don't think you can generalize a whole, there's just so many different people. And what is universal is most people are not getting any sex education. And most people are being taught by their gym teacher still. And not to disparage gym teachers at all, but most of them don't want to be teaching sex education and they're not
Yeah.
getting any training to do it. And there's a lot of, like you are just said about the internet, there's a lot of misinformation that may be taught by sex educators too. There's a lot of fear based approaches. There's a lot of shame that's involved. And so there is some universality to that experience of bad sex education. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of unlearning. There's a lot of, again, just misinformation. And so, with all the different backgrounds of folks, we had this commonality of not getting what we needed. And we have a lot of work to do to go forward with that without this idea that if we're going to talk about it, young people are going to go do it. There's just really this mindset that, oh, no, no, just say no. And if we talk about it, they're going to actually go have sex. On average, I think it's about 17 years old is when people, around 70-80% young people are start being sexually active. Around 85% of college students are sexually active. There's some research on that decreasing, but people don't really know why. And is it decreasing because people are feeling pressure to not have penis vagina sex because that's all about losing virginity? So they're actually doing other things like anal and oral that they don't count as sex. So are they really reporting when you do that kind of research? So I don't find that particularly helpful to be like, oh, younger people, it's decreasing the rate in which there's still a large percentage of folks that are being sexually active without any
Mhm.
information. And that is dangerous. There's a lot of space for harm. And research that does show where comprehensive sex education, actually, the more informed people are, the longer they may wait, and if they are choosing to be sexual, the more agency they have just over their bodies, over their safety, over their health. And I don't see why that's a problem for so many.
I don't either, Lisa. I really don't. And it's very scary. Even in like my chat rooms, I do some cam work, right? And I'm always trying to find a space to educate. And sometimes the things that I'm hearing, it's a lot that I'm having to challenge. And it is very scary. It's wow, y'all just out here thinking like this. Whoa. It's very scary. And so I cannot say how important the work that you're doing is. And again, we just need you to put you on a big screen. Just need everyone to just sit down and shut the fuck up and just listen. But with that though, how can we, everyday folk, right? Folks who are listening to this conversation, how can we make conversations about sex and sexuality not only more inclusive, but to be more mindful in these conversations?
I feel like that there's a cycle that needs to be broken. And that is, how do we talk to the next generation? And I always think, wait, like your parents didn't know how to talk to you and you struggled with all this. And now you're a parent. How about you do it differently? Right. But we
Mhm.
don't have the tools. Typically, we don't have the tools. We remember it as awkward and awful when our parents did try to have the talk with us or whatever adults that we might have been interacting with, or they're like, as our one friend said, that we have in common. He said his talk was at like age 16. His parents were like, do you have any questions? But at 16, it's no. Like, I'm
Mhm.
mortified at this
Yeah.
point. So we don't have the tools as parents to have those conversations. So thinking about how do we expand on those tools and how do you actually do scaffolding with kids? So you're not waiting until a certain age to have one talk and then being like, okay, we're done versus like, how do I talk about terminology so that my kid is empowered to talk about their body parts in a way that they would talk about any other body parts, right? So I always crack the joke about head, shoulders, knees, and toes, vulva, but that's terrifying for people. It's, oh gosh, it needs to be called a hoo ha or the honey pot or cookie. We're going to keep it cute. And you can have your cute names, but also empower your kids to know terminology like they
Yeah.
would elbow. We're not calling this the butterfly
Yeah.
or the daisy for whatever.
Mhm.
So that's part of that scaffolding. And then you can start talking to your kids about consent without it having to be about sex, learning to ask for a hug, adults asking kids for hugs so that they can learn about agency over their bodies and that they have a voice. about whether or not someone's going to be touching them. A lot of that's like safety stuff too, right?
Mhm.
And then they start asking questions. And so, how do they know that you're a safe person to ask those questions? Because then they will be curious about how are babies made. And you just keep building up so that they keep approaching adults as resources. But we're so focused on abstinence only, and that's impacting parents too. It's not just impacting the education system. It's no, just don't do it.
Yeah,
You need to wait till later or wait till a certain age, which again is instilling fear and silencing that curiosity.
Absolutely. With any topic, having more knowledge about it helps you to maybe be less risk averse. No, more risk averse. And it helps you to be able to communicate effectively when something is wrong or when something is happening that you don't particularly enjoy or want.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense for people to remain in the dark about this unless a certain group of people were trying to maintain control over another group of people by keeping them in the
Yes.
dark.
Yes. That may be happening.
Plainly, plainly, because if you don't know, you can't advocate for yourself as effectively.
Very true. And there's a lot of really bad sex happening.
Oh, yes. Actually, I have a question. This is random.
Yeah.
Would you ever write like a children's book about sex and sexuality?
Corey Silverberg has done a really good job with sex as a funny word and sex. I don't know if I could. So he has two different books. I actually have one right here because I was just talking to a student. This is the newest one that just came out. So this is for 13 to 17. And then I assign sex as a funny word to my human sexualities class and they have to write a paper about it.
Hmm.
So I think it would be pretty hard to recreate something new because those are so amazing and so inclusive and like gender neutral language. Like this is the third book. The first one is How to Make a Baby, I believe is what it's
Mm.
called. And so it goes from like kindergarten to 12th grade and he uses language like some bodies have eggs, some bodies make sperm. So it's all very gender neutral and inclusive.
I think that's going to be a great resource if there are any parents watching or listening, if
Yes.
they wanted to try to find some supportive resources to have those
Yeah.
conversations.
It's called What Makes a Baby
Okay.
is the first book. But those resources are great resources. The fact that I have it right here, right now, is because I was just talking to a student who wanted to talk to a cousin. And I'm like, here's a great book.
That's great. I feel like that's going to help some folks. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we're going back to the technology conversation. When we think of dating and how it has changed so much with apps and social media, how do you feel like that is shifting, I guess, the dating and sex landscape for us? Is it positive or negative?
I pretty much approach everything as pros and cons. I don't feel like absolute about any, except that our sex education is really bad. I feel absolute
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Because people are accessing people in ways that didn't exist before. And that's so amazing to be able to meet people that way. Meanwhile, it's hard for a lot of people too. It's just the rejection or being ghosted or stuff that like I guess existed, but it was just so much harder to do because we only had telephones or maybe it was easier. I don't know. You can kind of like figure out where people are now in scary
Mhm.
ways. It's such a mixed bag for folks.
Yeah.
And some of the pros are like particularly for folks who are queer, being able to filter, are people going to be okay with me? Can I be out? For trans folks, like being honest from the beginning so that it's not midway that somebody finds out they're trans and then it's scary and they have no idea how that person's going to react. So they're creating community through dating apps is happening also. So there's all this kind of amazing stuff that is happening. But one thing with researching for the bisexuality book, it's as bisexual people, it's hard to use a lot of the dating apps. So some of them are more bi friendly than others. And what can happen is the threesome fantasy of the straight cis guy wanting to be with two women and having their girlfriend pretend like they're bisexual to rope in another woman. There was a lot of that was in the research and talking to people about it. So in that way, there's some negatives that a lot of bisexual people are like, no, I don't want to be your fucking porn fantasy right now.
My take on
Yeah.
that, hire a fucking sex worker. If you talk to your partner, of course, talk to them. But also, there are people who are going to be available and happy to be your third for a fee as long as you complete their pre-screening process. And like, there's a way for you to do that. I think that people need to be more open about hiring sex workers instead of trying to get, we call them the civilians, right? Like, instead of trying to get like women who are not in that industry to be your unicorn for
Right.
free, doing labor for you. And I think there are sites where you can find someone who just wants to hook up. So like the FetLife and Field, right? The Tenders, you can find them, but I think that like sex workers are right there. You know what I mean? Happy to
Well,
provide a service.
it's also hard in a smaller community to be like, how do you put yourself out there to, if you do want to have a threesome, I don't want to shame threesomes at all, but I like your idea of hiring a sex worker because if that experience is what you want versus you want a third person to be your non-monogamy partnership triad, that's very different, right? It's no, I
Mhm.
just want to fulfill this fantasy once. I think that's important to hear what you're saying about that being an option versus I'm going to go bullshit and lie to somebody
Yeah.
and pretend like I'm bisexual and then being like, actually, can our boyfriend join? Can my boyfriend join or whatever? And lying to people.
Yeah.
Talking to a student recently who was like, just like going to the bars are just depressing. And people are just like, they just all start hooking up and making out at the bars. And I'm just like sitting there. And so, how do I meet people? Apps can be great in that way. But then
Yeah.
people are like, ugh, I keep meeting duds on apps, but that's also the world of dating.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are definitely some duds before I ever witnessed any dating apps.
Yeah. I was listening to Coleman Domingo talk about how he met his husband. And it was very much so meet cute, like serendipitous, right place, right time.
Yeah, there's like beauty in that. And then also, we put such value on that being the way that we're supposed to be versus shaming people who meet on websites or dating apps.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a great meet cute story with Andy, my husband, kind of thing, but it's also random encounters. It really dating apps are random too. You're being a little more intentional looking at things, but it's just as random as just because those two met that way doesn't mean they're going to be compatible.
Yeah.
Just
That's,
because you meet in a natural way.
yeah.
How many like jerks did I actually get involved with?
That's,
Even though we just met through a friend, humans were flawed.
yeah. It's not always going to be a perfect process. I get that. I just love
Yeah.
those kinds of stories. And they've been together for 19 years or something like that. It's beautiful. But I do think that with the online dating thing, I do hear stories of people who are like, oh, let's lie about how we met each other. You don't have to do that. Okay, you
Yeah.
met through Tinder. Okay. That's just the way that you met the person. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of with that. I think if anything, that makes your story way more interesting because you found someone who you have like commonality with amongst like all of the people who are on Tinder. That's amazing that you found that. It's
Right.
incredibly rare because there are a lot of duds, unfortunately, on these dating apps. And you found a good one. You know what I mean? So yeah, I do think we should take some of that shame out
Well,
of the online dating space.
I think there's a hierarchy. We have all these hierarchies everywhere. You've
Yeah.
talked about that within sex work, the hierarchy that you talked about
Mhm.
before in your interview with me. And there's hierarchies in relationships, right? The way you met is there's supposed to be this like, oh, the good way you meet versus dating apps. Like, the fuck, it shouldn't matter at all. And there's a hierarchy of what kind of relationship you're having. If it's monogamous, if it's straight, if it's cis, all these
Mhm.
things, these hierarchies of relationships. So I see that happening all the time. And it's wow, whatever works for folks.
Yeah. I think another challenge though is that's what we see on TV. We see these meet cutes, these like super cutesy stories of how people are connecting. And that's just not
Right.
a reflection of real life, unfortunately, but that's what we see a lot, you know?
That's true.
Disney fucked us up. We're supposed to be rescued by a prince. You know what I mean?
It's
uh
always that rom com. I'm
yeah.
watching a lot of that stuff too. And it's like, I'm totally into that formula. And I'm always like, okay, media literacy, critique what you're watching right now.
Yeah.
How am I
Yeah.
being brainwashed?
That's so funny. And that leads us into the next question, though, of what TV shows are getting it right. I know it's rare that TV shows are going to get it perfect, but are there any TV shows, movies, or books that you think portray sex and relationships in a positive or realistic way?
Co-teaching a new class with Andre Cavalcante. Yes, called Streaming Sexualities. We did that last fall and we get to teach it again this fall. And
Exciting.
yeah, it's very fun. And he's awesome, as you well know. Uh,
Hmm.
and representation of sex in the media and the impact of streaming and marathon watching is what he calls it instead of binge watching, all these things that we do consuming streaming. So this is stuff that we're teaching about that ties into that question. But I think one of the best shows is Sex Education. They really just covered so much and just did so well. There's some criticism, of course, but I was watching it again to teach about it, and I was just like, "Oh my god, this show!" I'm like, nobody's done this in any other show. I'm always
Mhm.
yelling at the screen, like, "Wow, this is incredible!" So depressing that show ended after 4 seasons, but there was just the reality and the awkwardness and getting it wrong and not
Mhm.
really knowing what to do and queer identities and the intersection of race. And there's just so much going on. So I feel like everybody should watch that show, no matter what age you are. Well,
Have you
maybe
seen
not.
Big Mouth?
Yeah.
It got
Why is
very weird.
he?
It got very weird, but I feel like there were some moments where I was like, yes,
Yes. Yes.
so
Like
you
the
got those
period
parts right.
one. Yeah.
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 So there were some elements in that where I was like, yeah, this is good. This is going to be helpful for people. And then it just started taking some turns and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
All right. But
I
yeah.
think there's some different shows that are trying. Never Have I Ever, I think it's another show. Sex Lives of College Girls, I think was doing some interesting stuff, at least exploring like female pleasure and
Mhm.
desire and not shaming sexuality, having characters with disabilities. That's definitely a issue in society of treating people with disabilities as if they're not sexual beings. Grace and Frankie, if we're talking about older women, but there's so much more that needs to be covered and covered
Mm.
well that these are all almost exceptions. And sex education had storyline dealing with sexual violence also that I think was handled really well. Or just even seeing examples of consent pose, I think is another amazing show to just talk about queer identities and ballroom culture. Of course, that's
Mm.
taking place in the 80s, but I think there's still a lot to learn from that show as
Yeah.
queer people of color. And the show Normal People, I think, has a great example. We rarely see people having that discussion of consent. Here's my take on the majority of sex scenes. They're heterosexual and they're cis. There's a man and a woman, and somebody opens up the door, and the other person's on the other side and they just start going at it. And then they got to shut the door and then they're up against the wall. He's always up against the wall. And then the woman gets lifted, which I don't think I've ever been lifted in my life. I'm still waiting to get lifted and then lifts her up and carries her to a bed. And then there's like instant penetration and they both have orgasms at the same time. And then they're both really happy and satisfied.
No foreplay.
No.
He might go down. There have been those scenes where the guy's head is like between her legs like this, you know what I mean? But no, it's wild. And then even now, the idea of, oh, let's come together. That is like a something that I think a lot of people hold on to. Especially I see it in my like my cam shows and stuff and like my private calls. People expect that. Let's come at the same time. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, it's something like less than 5% of people can. That actually happens with somebody. And then if you're expecting that with just penis vagina sex too, that's going to be a really small percentage.
Yeah.
So the point of that whole story is that I think what sex education did so well was to show the realities, and also it's still a TV show, right? I think people have this idea that if you don't have sex portrayed this certain way, that, it's going to take away the sexiness of it. It's going to take away the entertainment of it, that it has to be this formula of how sex is portrayed. I think it's pretty hot when they show consent and communication, and that how some more of the more realistic portrayals of sex, it can still be hot.
Yeah. Something I'm not really seeing though in media at all is like polyamory.
Yeah. Oh no.
I don't think I've seen that at all really.
No, like Sense8 had a little bit of a storyline where one person had two dads and a mom, but it's peripheral. Had a storyline a little bit in sex education. I think that was the fourth season. But typically what happens, I'm always excited if it is in a storyline, and then it always implodes. It always goes wrong. So there was a season of Insecure where the main character's friend Molly gets involved with a guy who's in an open marriage, and she gets really freaked out by it. It's like they had the storyline in there, but then she's like, "Ugh."
Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm like, yeah, yeah, they're trying here. Wow, they're going to show it was consensual and he's communicating and it's not cheating and all this stuff. And then a person gets grossed out by it and it ends. I still have yet to see. There was another show that was called Wanderlust, where there's a married couple that decides to open up their marriage. And I was like, all right, here's the show. And then everything goes wrong.
But I feel like even when the shows get it wrong online, like on social media, I feel like I'm seeing more discussions about polyamory, but I'm also seeing a lot of things that I'm like, I know that's wrong. So, how do you feel about these increased conversations about polyamory? And what are people getting wrong about it?
I think it's great to have the social media is so amazing. If you looked at polyamory on TikTok or Reels or whatever, there's just so much that's out there. I think there's still a lot of stereotypes of the cis white dude who has two wives or two girlfriends. As I think that stereotype is what is perpetuating people's perceptions of it. There's just some greedy dude who gets to have two girlfriends or something. So there's a lot of misinformation that way. But there's just so many ways that non monogamy can exist. And for people to see that spectrum, I think is great. If people want to be monogamous, I think that's a great choice for people. We need more information to do it well because there are a lot of people cheating on each other, which is not consensual non monogamy. That's betrayal, that's lying, that's not being honest, where consensual non monogamy would be about communicating, being honest, being above board, recognizing that your partner has another partner or whatever that reality is or whatever that's going to look like. Or people create different rules where the 100-mile rule, like as long as you're 100 miles or more away from me, you can do whatever. So there's lots of different renditions of that. And I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding or, oh, it's just a bunch of people who are a bunch of freaks that just want to go have sex with everybody. And that's what it's about versus that could be part of it, but it also could be about falling in love with other people. Just think about like another common trope for so many TV shows is somebody's torn between two lovers and they need to decide. We know people fall in love with more than one person. We recognize that it's happened to us. but that trope of the person has to decide. And we wouldn't have any movies if we actually understood non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, with that tension of no, I have to pick him over him and or her over her. And that'll be the that's what concludes the story. So it's not like a foreign concept that we could love to people. It's like we're so invested in monogamy as what's normal. But no, you have to make that choice. Something's wrong with you. Compulsory monogamy is definitely the norm or dominant culture norm.
Yeah. But meanwhile, I have like friends who are in like various polyamorous relationships. And one thing that I love seeing is how they communicate with their partners. I'm like, damn, y'all really got it figured out. Like, though it's like a confidence that they have in themselves and in their partner. It's really beautiful to see. When I see
Yeah.
how they communicate, it's just so cool to me and so beautiful. And there's just like a knowing. And I know it takes a lot of work to get to that point, but I just had to put that in there because it's wow, y'all are doing a good job with your communication. Things that you don't even realize that you need to communicate. It's just so beautiful. And they seem so happy.
Yeah.
So obviously they're doing something right. But I know that's not all polyamorous relationships, but just the
No.
ones I've seen have been really beautiful and so cool to watch how they move.
A lot of people who are monogamous will be like, I can barely handle one relationship. Like, how do poly people deal with more? And that I think one thing that is a big challenge for so many of us, regardless of our relationship structure, is being able to communicate.
Mhm.
And that really does take a lot of work to do it in a way that's not harmful, that's not passive aggressive, that's not manipulative, to
Mhm.
be honest, to be radically honest. On your Renee Taylor says it is a skill and it takes practice, and you have to be really invested in it to do it well. But anybody could benefit from that. I'm joking around in class now about the three C's. So it's like communication, consent, and coming. Those are the three C's.
That's funny. Yeah, I think that is critical to any successful.
Yes, yes.
So, with that though, have you received any incredible relationship advice over the years? Like, what has been something that stood out to you? Have you received anything like that?
I can't think of something specific that somebody told me, but something that I just saw recently that's fresh in my head and I talked about at the Profs and Pints talk was I think there's a lot of struggle for folks, particularly in longer term relationships, about having sex. And particularly as somebody who's aging and dealing with menopause now, I feel like I have a lot of women friends in particular who are like, they've been so socialized that sex is supposed to be penis and vagina sex, right? And that's been so normalized that when the vagina starts changing with aging, they're like, I just don't want to have sex at all now because it doesn't feel as good. There's not as much elasticity with the vagina with aging. Lubrication production can go down. And so people aren't having sex at all. It's like a bird. That's one example of it. Or it's just hard to keep the spark going, the interest. And people will often say, "Hey, do you wanna have sex?" And the other partners, "No," because that just feels like too big of a movement to be like, from sitting on this couch to I've gotta now have sex. Something that just stood out to me recently was this sex educator talking about, what if partners asked each other, from 0 to 10, how willing are you to be turned on right now? Instead of being like, "Let's go have sex," 'cause that just seems like too big of a jump of transition versus, "Oh, maybe I feel like about a 5 or 6, but what might that entail to get me turned on? Does this mean I get to have a massage?" Because that's
Also,
pretty exciting.
I feel like that also touches on the point that foreplay begins outside of the bedroom. So I think that as you're learning your partner's needs and wants, both sides, right? Both all parties involved, like you need to learn what they need to feel sexy, to feel in the mood. And a lot of times it really is gonna start way before you're in the mood. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that people gotta consider. Lisa, thank you so much. is there anything that you'd like to leave the people with on today?
Oh, I say listen to podcasts, read books, be brave in trying to start a conversation. There's a lot of resources out there about how do I communicate with my partner about things like collaborative consent? How do you want to feel in this interaction? How will I know that you're enjoying this? What would make this more fun? All of those kind of questions, going back to your original compliment of me with asking questions, but keep researching how do we ask questions to have these conversations. And they're awkward, they're funny, it's weird, it can be hard, but our pleasure matters and it it's a part of us, our humanity. And how do we access that better?
Thank you so much, Lisa. This was awesome.
Thank you.